India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi heads to the United States this week for a high-level state visit, which will include addressing a joint session of Congress. The Indian leader is used to playing a big stage in the U.S. He held a massive Howdy Modi rally in Texas during his last trip in 2019, where he was celebrated by India's sizable diaspora in the U.S., together with then-President Donald Trump. So, what's expected this time around? Here's DW Washington correspondent Janelle Dumalayan for more.
With the warmest of welcomes expected from Modi, it's hard to imagine that once upon a time, Modi was denied entry to the U.S. since he failed to stop deadly riots in the state of Gujarat, where he was chief minister. But times have changed. It's 2023, and growing Chinese assertiveness is bolstering India's geopolitical relevance and making the U.S. want a closer relationship with it. Defense deals, technology transfer agreements, and economic investment appear to be the way into New Delhi's heart. And there are benefits for both sides. India and the U.S. both agree it is good to help wean India off of Russian-supplied weapons, or at least to diversify supply. But larger questions still loom over the U.S.-India relationship. There is the issue of democratic backsliding in India, and how India has failed to join the U.S. and its allies in condemning Russia over its invasion of Ukraine. But Modi's state visit is symbolic of a longer-term bet that Washington is making, that pulling all the stops to pull India into the U.S.'s orbit will improve its defensive position in the Indo-Pacific and convince New Delhi to find ways to bridge some of its differences in mindset with Washington, despite its desire for strategic autonomy.
Joining us is Kanti Bajpai from the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at the National University of Singapore. Professor, it looks like quite the red carpet the Americans have rolled out for Modi. What does that signal?
Well, I think the United States is obviously quite keen to engage India further, geopolitically, economically, and even politically, culturally. And I think from the American side, I think President Biden has it in view that Mr. Modi is popular and is still in power and needs to be engaged further and cultivated further. So I think on the American side, that's the case. On the Indian side as well, there's a political motive. Mr. Modi will be going into general elections next year for his possible third term in office. And I think he wants to be seen on the big stage. I think he's got geopolitics and security on his mind. There's the constant worry about China, of course, which is a neighboring country which India has a quarrel with. There are economic points of engagement with the United States. India wants technology, it wants investment, it wants to boost trade. And I think lastly, of course, there's the political cultural. There's a very big Indian diaspora in the United States, somewhere between 4 and 5 million. They're very prosperous. And I think Mr. Modi wants to touch base with them and cultivate them as well, as much as the American establishment.
You mentioned China. How important is China as a factor for the convergence of U.S. and Indian interests?
It is important, obviously. China is America's biggest rival. I think that's pretty plain. India has a long-standing border quarrel with China, and since the mid-2010s, since 2013, in fact, there's been a spate of border confrontations with China, culminating in the largest one in 2020 when there was loss of lives, and again last year. So that border quarrel remains unresolved, and I think India feels, secondly, the enormous heat of Chinese power. China's GDP, nominal GDP, today is 5 times India's size, at about $19 trillion, whereas India is at about 3.5, 3.6. So, the power differential also is very worrying to India. And so, yeah, China is more than just the elephant in the room. It's almost a talking point, a public talking point.
Now, Washington, both this administration and last, is choosing to overlook the anti-democratic tendencies of Modi. How much do you think is that a problem?
It's a problem on both sides. The criticism in the Western countries, including the United States, primarily in the media, in some arms of government, from civil society, from think tanks, as well as civil society organizations such as human rights organizations. I mean, these have hurt India. And India's Foreign Minister, S. Jaishankar, has led the charge, as it were, rhetorically, against these kinds of comments. He's made some very frank and almost brutal statements about these kinds of statements. On the other hand, clearly he's had to be careful what he says about the US government, given that India wants to cultivate Washington. On Washington's side, I mean, I think it's clear that, as Antony Blinken and other spokesmen of the United States have said, they are watchful of the democratic backsliding, the treatment of minorities, the human rights violations, and so on that's occurring in India. And that is a worry. I mean, the diaspora, which is in the United States to the tune, as I said, of 4.5 million, they're not all Modi supporters.
Right.
There are liberal secularists there who are voters in America who don't like Modi. There are other people in the United States who are very critical of India's present conditions. So, the Biden administration has to be concerned about its own public opinion and domestic sources of criticism of India. At the same time, there's the very broad strategic logic. So I think it's a tough call for the Biden administration.